the conversation is on overcoming resistance. And I'm a little hesitant to use that term because it makes it sound like there's something in us that we need to overcome or a part of us that we need to overcome. And so it's partially true, but it can also have some rather negative implications. And the most important thing that I think I can give you here is the biggest problem people have when it comes to their resistance. It's the part that people, I think, struggle with the most. I'm going to save that for last. I'm going to save the best for last, the biggest problem, but I'm going to give it to you. Plus, I'm going to give you a ton of stuff here that is very useful that I use all the time. And as I was planning this, I was like, wow, I just started gushing onto my notebook, all of the stuff that I could tell you about resistance. There's so much there. But of course, we have a limited amount of time, and I wanted to make sure that I give you the best of the best. So let's dive right in. I want you to think first about how resistance is limiting you. And think about, or ask this question, is there anything you couldn't do or become if you had no resistance? Think about that for a moment. My answer to that question is no, all right? Resistance is the only thing standing between you and everything that you want to do and everything that you want to become. This doesn't mean that we want to go to the fantasy world of thinking of we can actually get to that place where there's zero resistance. That's not actually what we want, because that would be a little too ungrounded. And I'll explain what I mean by that as we go forward. Is resistance bad? No, it's not. It's not good or bad. All behavior has a positive intention. That's one of the presuppositions of NLP. And we can look at resistance the same way. Resistance always has a positive intention. There is a positive function to resistance. If we demonize it, if we judge it, we put another barrier between us and actually being able to do something about the resistance. We make it more difficult for us to be flexible and to use the positive function of resistance to serve us. So let's relax that judgment of, well, resistance is bad. And when we do judge it that way, that's when we start getting that stuff and that you see so common in personal development about bulldozing over your resistance, using discipline, using willpower to overcome your resistance. When people say that, that's because they don't understand what resistance is. They don't understand that it has a positive function. They are judging resistance, and therefore, when you judge resistance, it looks like an enemy. It looks like an opponent that you wanted to defeat. But in trying to defeat resistance, you're only going to defeat yourself, ultimately. The other thing that I think resistance does, or leads people when they start making these harsh judgments and they start drawing these conclusions about resistance, is it often leads people to this idea that they're broken or that they need fixing. I want to do this thing, something in me stops me, something in me sabotages me, I must be broken. I must need to be fixed. So I'm going to go watch these YouTube videos and try to find a solution to this. And then you hear people screaming, oh, you got to bulldoze over, you got to discipline, you're still going to whoop. And then it just piles on more and more resistance and more noise, more judgment, more barriers, more limitations, and just makes it worse and worse. And I'm speaking from experience. That's exactly what I did early on before I started to really dedicate my life to the work that I do now. When I didn't understand resistance, that's what I did. And I know a lot of people are still doing that, because I get people coming onto my YouTube videos all the time, making comments like, you don't understand discipline and willpower. You don't understand what resistance actually is. And so I'll engage them and have a dialogue with them. And sometimes they understand better what I'm trying to explain to them. And then they have a real change, because they're so hardened in the shell of these ideas that it must be this way because I heard someone really famous, someone more famous than me. I'm not famous. Someone famous, someone who makes more money than me, someone far more successful than I am, made these statements. Therefore, it must be true. Okay, well, Go ahead and go down that route and see if it turns out the way you deal with it turns out to give you all that success and money and everything. I'm pretty sure it's not going to do that. And even if it does, then you become one of those people who's very successful and miserable at the same time and can't enjoy it, because it's always about more willpower, more discipline, more defeating yourself, and submitting your resistance. So you're not broken. You don't need fixing. All you need to do is just reorganize what you pay attention to. That's really all it is. So it's a lot easier than you probably think. So you don't have to go to war with yourself, and you don't have to fix yourself. Have you ever found yourself about to make a decision, but something doesn't feel right, and you go, no, I'm going to choose something else? Not that you sat and waited, not that you didn't do anything. You went to make that choice. This was the choice you were going to make. Something didn't sit right with you. You stopped and you go, I'm going to make this other choice. And you're really happy you made that other choice, because when you see in retrospect where that other choice that you almost made, had you made that choice, it would have been really bad. You realize that now. So you're really happy you made the choice that you made. Something got in your way, slowed you down, put the brakes on, and said, hold on, something's not right. And you listened to that, and it served you really well. Guess what? That was resistance. That was resistance doing that. So resistance can be really good. It can be really good. In fact, it's probably the only way that you recognize resistance is when it's gotten in your way of doing something you wanted to do, and then you judge yourself for it, or you judge the resistance. You probably haven't taken inventory of all the times that resistance served you well. We don't think about those times. We tend to overlook those. And because it turned out well, we don't think of it as resistance, because we only think of resistance as being something that's negative. But resistance has served you very well in your life so many times, and you don't even know it. So it's good to start making this conscious. And when you think about those times where you did hesitate and you made a different choice, and that choice served you really well, you can thank resistance for that. If you're about to do something that might violate one or more of your values, you naturally experience resistance. It's very natural to experience resistance when you are facing that. When you're about to do something and there's an unconscious part of you that recognizes this may get in the way, not only get in the way of you fulfilling a value, it might actually violate that value. Resistance will come up. When we get so caught up in our self-importance and success at any cost, we often will do things that violate our values. Things like, or values like compassion and kindness. We might step on someone, and we probably experienced some resistance before we did that. We did it anyway. And that part of you goes, we really don't like that experience. That doesn't feel good to do that. And that part of you is going to resist if you're in that situation again. It's going to try to stop you and say, we don't want this. I use this example so many times because it was one of the best things that ever happened, but it felt like the worst thing that was happening to me is when I was trying to get my insurance business to be successful. And I experienced tremendous resistance to that. And I couldn't understand it. And I thought I was broken. I thought I needed fixing. I really thought that there was something wrong with me. And just like so many people who come to me now, I was thinking to myself, I just want to hire a coach or a therapist to destroy this part of me. And of course, couldn't find anyone like that. I'm really happy that nobody took me up on that offer. When I think about that, had I been successful at my insurance business, it would have been so hard to leave it, even though it made me absolutely miserable. But if I was absolutely miserable, but I was making a ton of money, I would have justified and said, oh, well, I don't really know. It's a hypothetical, but I probably would have had a really hard time leaving it for doing something that I really enjoy. And I see a lot of people like this who are very successful in their careers, but they're miserable. I can't understand why. I coach a lot of these people, and I warn them because oftentimes I can see this when I elicit their values. I warn them. I say, okay, how much do you want to turn this around? Or is it so much so that you would be willing to leave your career? And I'll tell them, I don't know if that's what's going to happen, but if that's what you're facing, are you willing to do that? And surprisingly, a lot of people are, because they're that miserable. And I had a guy one time who came to me and he wanted me to help him be better at sales. And it became real clear when I elicited his values. He didn't really want to be better at sales. That's what he thought he wanted. He just really didn't enjoy it. He enjoyed working with people. That was what he loved, and that's what he was good at, but not in the sales frame. It just didn't really work for him. So we worked at it, and we came to that place where it was obvious to me. I wasn't sure if it was obvious to him that it's not about him being better at sales. It's that he really doesn't enjoy it, and that's why he's experiencing a lot of resistance around becoming better and better at it. And then the next week, we start the session, and he just kind of gushes. He just kind of burst open. He says, "Oh, I know what it is." He said, "I want to quit. I don't want to do this job anymore. That's what I want to pursue I want to become a coach. I want to pursue that. I know that that's what I want to do. I know that's what will make me feel good. And even if I don't make that much money at it, even if I don't make as much money at it as the sales job, it's worth it to me because I'm miserable right now in this position." So I made sure that we worked it out, put everything out on the table, make sure you understand what you're doing if you're going to go quit this job. And he didn't even have anything else lined up. And I was like, well, maybe you should get something else lined up before you completely stop your income. And he was so adamant about it. He's like, no, I'll be fine. I'll figure it out. And it was amazing because he just had so much clarity now about his values. And that's part of the coaching process. They get very clear about what your values are. And so I said, okay, see you next week. And next week, we had a session, and I'm thinking, okay, he's going to tell me about how he quit his job. And that's not what happened. He said, well, they wouldn't let me quit. I was like, what? And he said, yeah. So I was like, are you still doing sales? And he said, no. I was like, okay, what happened? He said, well, when I went to turn in my resignation, they simply said, we won't let you quit. And he persisted, tried to quit. And they finally said to him, hey, what do you want to do? And he said, I want to be a coach. And they said, okay, well, we need a supervisor to manage and coach the sales team. Do you want to do that? And he just lit up and he was like, well, yeah, that's what I want to do. And I said, okay, you want to make more money? And he was like, yeah. And I said, okay, we'll give you a raise. So they wouldn't let him quit. They gave him a raise and they put him in the position that he wanted to be in. Now, I'm not going to guarantee that every time it works out this well. It doesn't always work out quite that well, but it can. And in general, if your default is set with aligning with your values, understanding what your resistance is really about, more times than not, things are going to work out much better for you. So because resistance comes up naturally when you're about to violate a value or potentially violate a value, the question really is the resistance accurate? And this is what really needs to be explored. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just old programming. And when you were younger, certain things might have seemed really terrifying, would have violated your values, but now that you're older, it won't. You've changed, we grow, things change. And so the resistance might be an isolated part that never quite grew up, never quite developed, and is still clinging to an old understanding about what's important to you. So that part needs to be integrated. We'll talk more about that. But that might be what the resistance is coming from. So it's really not accurate. It just, the programming needs to be updated. But sometimes the resistance is accurate, like my situation with my insurance business. Had I become that successful, I would have almost guaranteed, it is a hypothetical, but I would have almost guaranteed that I would have lived the rest of my life being quite miserable, though maybe really wealthy. And I might have been able to use that wealth to sort of numb me to the fact that I was miserable. Would have been terrible. So much happier now, following my values and understanding my resistance to what's not going to work for me. And the same for my coaching client who did the same thing. Resistance also happens when you're bumping up against a boundary of your map of reality. And this explains what I was just talking about with the isolated part. The map of your reality might be outdated. And when you bump up against one of those boundaries, you experience resistance. And therefore, the resistance isn't really accurate. It's a perceived boundary. And the boundary being maybe a fear that you're going to violate one of your values when in fact you're not. But if you created that boundary in your map of reality and you believe you will, the resistance still comes up. So either the resistance is pointing at something that is accurate and we need to deal with and take into consideration because we're going to violate one of our values, or it's a perceived boundary that we are afraid to cross. We think that we might violate a value when actually we're not, what we want to do doesn't do that. But the perception makes it seem real to you. So how do we update the map of reality? Well, this is what we call a parts integration. And there are some tools to deal with that, and I'm going to talk about those, and a lot of you are already quite familiar with those tools. I'm going to give you 3, and you can decide which ones are appropriate for your situation when you're dealing with resistance. They're all valuable in their own way. I maybe could say that one is better than all of the others, but you might not always have the time to do that one. It's a little more involved. When I talk about our map of reality, one of the ways that we map our reality is what we call internal boundaries. This is what creates parts. We divide ourselves into parts. And it's amazing how much we can really believe in this, like it's actually real, when the truth is you were always one whole human being. You never stopped being one whole human being. You were born one whole human being, including your consciousness and your unconscious, your awareness. It's never been divided. And you will live your life as a whole human being. And when you die, you're dying as a whole human being. But it's the perception of having different parts that creates all the friction and the conflict from within that creates these internal conflicts. And how we deal with that is through parts integration. So you might be wondering, well, why is it we do this to ourselves? Well, it's usually about protection and self-preservation. We create a lot of internal boundaries because of pain, especially emotional pain. Now, sometimes it can be physical pain. There are people who maybe they had an injury and they create an internal boundary around that injury. And maybe that's to protect it, or maybe it's extra tender. So they kind of try to create this sense of like remove consciousnness from it to kind of numb it. Really isn't true, but it can kind of give you the sense that you've done that you've pulled away from it. And so the pain you don't feel as much. But actually, usually the best way to deal with physical pain is to expand your awareness, include the part, don't exclude it, include the part, but much, much more. So it puts the pain in perspective. Milton Erickson was a genius at doing that when people came to him for physical pain, because he endured so much physical pain in his life. So rarely did he try to get the person to separate themselves from the pain. He would help them expand their awareness and their consciousness so that the pain seemed very small, because that's often what we do when we feel pain. All of our attention goes to that physical pain. And because we do that and we narrow our focus to that, it becomes our world. And so we live in a world of pain. But Milton Erickson would help that person expand their awareness to realize that the pain was just a small part of who they were. Awareness is unlimited, it's infinite. And so if, that pain then becomes like just a little tiny piece, a drop in a huge ocean. So now it doesn't feel so painful anymore. Now we have emotional pain. And where do we experience that emotional pain? We experience it in the body just as well. And oftentimes we will treat it just like any other pain. If we touch a hot stove and it burns us, we pull our hand away. We do the same with emotional pain. We feel something, an emotion, it manifests as a pain inside of our body, often in our heart or our gut, sometimes in our throat, or even in our chest. And if you ever experience heartbreak, I remember the first time I experienced heartbreak where I was 15 years old or 16 years old, and my girlfriend broke up with me, and I was amazed that I literally felt pain in my heart. And I thought this was just like something people say, but it's like, I'm really experiencing that. So people put boundaries around that. People put boundaries around their heart. Most people do. I did that myself. When we get into the self-concept, later in the self-concept, we start talking about boundaries. Boundaries we put externally around ourselves to protect ourselves. We also do internal boundaries to protect ourselves. And a lot of times it's protecting those areas that are very sensitive to emotion. And when we wall off those areas, we lose the resourcefulness of that part of us that can feel that. Yes, it's going to hurt sometimes, but it doesn't do you any good to completely separate yourself from that. You lose all the resourcefulness in that part of you. But it's a very natural reaction because we're hardwired to pull away from pain for self-preservation. And we create boundaries for self-preservation to protect ourselves. Also, people make an internal boundary between mind and body. We do this all the time. We talk about it. You hear people just use that in their language without even thinking about it too much. And people will literally believe that there is a separation, a literal separation between their mind and their body. But there is not. You cannot have a body without a mind, and you can't have a mind without a body. They're one and the same. Now, it can be useful to point to one or the other when you're talking about something that's very mental or something that's very physical. I think it's fine to do that. But if you start really believing that there is a separation between your mind and body, that could set you up for some internal conflicts, as if the two are different. And people will do that. People will say, okay, I don't trust the body. It's full of emotion. I don't trust that. Emotions don't tell us a lot about what's happening around us. So I'm not trusting it. I'm going to go all into my mind and analyze things and make my decisions that way. But you cannot make good decisions without accessing your feelings. They've done studies on this where people who have the brain damage where part of their brain is separated and they cannot experience emotions. And people thought, well, these people are going to make the best decisions in the world. Well, it turns out, no. Not only did they not make great decisions, they couldn't make decisions at all, because your decisions are always based around, you can say feeling, but it's not just like, oh, emotional feeling. I don't like it when people say that. They say people make their decisions, don't make decisions on logic, they make them on feelings. And that's true, but not true in the way that most people think it is. That feeling can be an evaluative feeling. It doesn't have to be an emotional feeling, because when people say that people don't make decisions based on logic, only feelings, it makes it sound like we're just these pleasure-seeking beings that only do things that feel good. That's not true. We're more sophisticated than that. We have evaluative feelings. If I go to a restaurant and I see two dishes I like on the menu, how I decide which one I want to eat is based on a feeling. Now, it can involve emotion because it could be like a comfort food, but it often doesn't. I don't have really strong emotions about the food that I eat, unless it's Mexican food and it's nachos, then I'm very emotional about that. It makes me very happy. But no, really, seriously, we have evaluative feelings, and that's what lets us know. And we feel that in our bodies. That's what lets us know what we want. Okay, I'm in the mood for this dish. And maybe tomorrow I'll be in a different mood and this other dish is what I want. It doesn't have to involve emotion to involve feeling. So often our boundaries are created around these painful feelings without understanding what's happening. We're just trying to protect ourselves. So we disconnect from the parts of us that feel pain. And like I said, that does not serve us very well. That often creates more problems than it solves. And this is why I don't like pursuing values with the word self in front of it. I've had maybe arguments is too strong of a word, but people within our groups who disagree with me, and they really go all in on this idea of self-love. And they'll tell me, okay, when I was a kid, I didn't get much love and I felt like I didn't deserve love. And so I'm trying to turn that around and focus on myself and loving myself. And I get that. I totally understand that. But you don't need to in order to correct it, you don't need to overcorrect by creating another boundary. This part, what you do when you go after self-love is you divide yourself into two, and you say, okay, this part is the part that's going to do the loving, and then this other part is going to be the part that receives the love. And it's like, it's just making things more complicated and still quite divisive. Remember, you're one whole human being. Just pull the plug on a boundary, just remove the boundary and realize that you are the source of love. You don't have to get yourself to love yourself. As long as you're divided, that's the way that you're going to think. And how can a divided self love itself? Doesn't quite work. So you just remove that boundary. And then there's no more resistance. There's no resistance to loving yourself because you are the source of love. Resistance gone. And that goes for any value that people want to pursue with self in front of it. I've never found that useful. The ultimate is to understand that you are a whole person, undivided. So you don't need to pursue self anything. This came up in one of our groups. That doesn't mean to stricken that from your vocabulary, that you can never put self hyphen anything. We can use that to point at certain things and to be more accurate at them. I'm saying to pursue a value that you want to fulfill. It will not help you to put self in front of it, to try to focus it. And especially with something like love, because love, I mean, what is love? Love is the absence of separation, the absence of conflict, the absence of division. It's oneness, it's wholeness. So let's not limit love with a boundary, even if it's an imaginary boundary. So boundaries are positively intended. Again, it doesn't serve us, just like resistance. It does not, just like it does not help us to judge resistance as good or bad. It's not going to help you to judge your boundaries as good or bad. They do have a positive function. We sometimes do need to protect ourselves. The question you have to ask yourself is the boundary, is it too much? Is it limiting you? Is it limiting your freedom? Is it limiting your fulfillment? You know, if we have too hard of a boundary that around ourselves, we don't connect well with others. If we have too thin of a boundary, we might give in to others too easily. We might become codependent. When we check in on our internal boundaries, does my heart need some protection? I think it does. And the original boundary that I had around my heart was kind of ridiculous. If you've been in our self-concept foundation track and have been in one of my tracks, I talk about it. I had when I went deep and discovered what boundary I put around my heart, it was clear plastic, like hard clear plastic, which was ridiculous. But I recognized that, yeah, I can't just be an open heart to everyone all the time. And that is something I struggled with. People would often say to me, you wear your heart on your sleeve. And then I would get hurt, and then I'd go the opposite direction. I'd become very cold. So I found this little way to protect my heart, which didn't work very well. So I replaced it. At the time that I was learning this from Steve, I was surfing. And if you don't know, Santa Cruz, where I live, is where the wetsuit was invented. And it's a neoprene material that allows the water in, but it heats up your body so much that by the time the water hits you, it's not cold anymore. It's like, that's what I'm going to put around my heart to protect it. So it's still a boundary, but it lets stuff in. And if anything is too painful, it kind of filters it, warms it up first. It's the way that I perceive it, and it works for me. So it's not necessarily about getting rid of all of your boundaries, but it's about understanding if you're experiencing resistance, it's probably a boundary. And then checking in, is it really working for you? Can you change, if it's not working for you, can you change it in such a way that it preserves the positive function of protecting you while limiting you as little as possible? That's what we're going for. Okay, so let's talk about the tools we use to integrate resistance. Take a sip of coffee first. So there's the classic visual squash. If you're in the NLP practitioner training, you will learn this, the visual squash. It's been around since NLP has been around. And it's this idea of understanding that you have a resistant part. And then you think about, okay, well, what is it I'm trying to do, right? I want to do this thing. That's what I'm conscious of. But there's a part that's holding back, that's stopping me, that's resisting, that's grinding me to a halt, slowing me down. Maybe it's procrastination. So that is a part. It's more unconscious, don't understand it as well. So we put these parts out on our hands. So let's say we choose, you get to choose which one goes where. So I might say, okay, what I'm consciously aware of, the goal that I want to achieve, I'm going to put that part here. And then I'm going to put the part that's resisting, the procrastinating part here. So I have these two parts. And the usefulness of this is that you kind of like step back from it and you become sort of that wholeness that holds the two parts. And in a sense, you're kind of the referee, you're the moderator, you're the arbiter, you're the one who's going to help these two parts work it out. So we get clear about what it is I want, and we go further to values. You might hear them called meta outcomes in a well-formed outcome. So I want to achieve this goal. What's important to me about that? And I keep chunking up to higher and higher values. And I get to values that like no part of me would resist, like being happy, being at peace, being joyful, right? No part of you is going to resist those values. All parts of you want those. And then we go to the resistant part. We say, okay, what is your positive intention? And when this part gives the positive intention, it often comes out stated in the negative. So like maybe this part really wants to be successful. And this part is worried that if we become successful, that we're going to become greedy. This is actually, I'm using my own experience. This is actually true for me. It was limiting me from becoming successful. I thought if I become successful, I will become greedy. So the resistant part is holding me back from becoming successful. And I said, okay, to this part, if you don't want this part to become greedy, or the wholeness to hold all of you to become greedy, what do you want instead? And this part says, well, I want you to be generous. Generous is a great value. Say, okay, well, if you want, what would being generous do for you? It'll make me happy. It'll make me at peace. It'll make me joyful, right? So we're getting up there to all the same values. And then eventually we realize the two parts are part of one whole that wants all the same values. They just have different ways of getting there. Really, essentially, what the two parts are two different strategies to get to the whole that are perceived as working against each other. So we just need to update the strategies to get the two parts to work together. And so we ask the part of this part's willing to work with this part, and we ask this part of this part's willing to work with this part, and they say, we get agreement, and then we say, okay, bam. And the whole thing's supposed to just work out. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It's actually quite crude if you understand how to do some of these other tools that I'm going to give you. So that was the idea. You gain agreement, you're willing to work it out with each other. You don't necessarily come up with exact strategies. Depending on the NLP coach, they may have you work out exact strategies or not. But originally the way it was done is you just gain agreement that you're working toward the same values. And you gain agreement that you're willing to work with each other. And then you slowly bring your hands together and then clasp them. And then you just hope everything works out. And so that's why I don't like this one that much. If I had nothing else, no other tools, this is a fine tool to use because probably more than 50% of the time, this actually works and you kind of feel it in your body. That's a lot of times in NLP, that's how you kind of know it's working. Like you feel that internal shift. So you have access to these tools, and I do recommend that you try out the visual squash just for your NLP literacy and your NLP experience. It's nice to know where NLP has come from. And then also, of course, you want to experience these other tools that we give so that you gain a well-rounded understanding and knowledge and experience with how these tools work. And when you have that, it makes the picture a bit bigger. It's the understanding becomes bigger than the sum of its parts. The most elegant, most powerful, most precise parts integration is what we call in the self-concept model is when we transform an ambiguous quality. So if you know self-concept, created by Steve Andreas. It's the model that models identity and how we transform our identity into more and more who we want to become based on our values. And he identified that there's different types of qualities that we're carrying around with us. First, there's a certain solid quality, the quality about you that you believe is true. Like, I am successful and I just know that. I feel certain about it. I am a persistent person. I just know that about myself. I believe that. I act in persistent ways. I'm very persistent, right? These are certain solid qualities. Then we have the unwanted qualities. That's whenever we identify with something that's negative, identify with something that goes against our values. Like, I'm lazy, I'm cruel, I'm an angry person. So these are not things that we like, but we feel very certain about them. We don't like this about ourselves, but we feel very certain about it. So that's an unwanted quality. And then we have the ambiguous quality. And that's the feeling of, well, sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. Are you a successful person? Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. Are you a happy person? Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. So that is a parts problem. Part of you feels like you are, part of you feels like you're not. Now, I'm not going to get into all of the details of how to transform an ambiguous quality because it's quite detailed. It's not difficult, but just very detailed, and it's something we teach extensively in our self-concept training. But basically what you do is you identify the positive examples of when you feel that you are this quality, and you assemble them into a template that is modeled after your quality that you're very, very certain about. And then what inevitably we will find is many, many counterexamples. That's part of what makes it ambiguous. You have about 50% positive examples and 50% counterexamples. So if it's about happiness, there's the many times I've been happy, and then there's about equal amount of all the times that I've been unhappy. And that's why this is going back and forth. This is why it's ambiguous, which is also very unstable. Ambiguous qualities are the most unstable qualities because we're not certain. Go back and forth. And if this gets really extreme, this is kind of like what bipolar is. Your various extremes. You have the high highs and then you have the low lows. Very unstable. So what we do is we transform those counterexamples and we integrate them into one template, which makes them very, very stable and makes you feel very, very certain about being the positive side of this. And that is a parts integration. And it's so precise. You can't not make it. I mean, you can, if you don't do the full transformation in one sitting, that's okay. You can keep coming back to it and finish it. That is the most precise, most elegant, most well, I don't know what other great things I can say about it, but it's definitely the most powerful of the parts integrations because it's using detailed examples to drive the integration and bringing it all together, and however it is that you create certainty in your mind about who you are. So that's two tools that you can use for parts integration. And then I'm going to give you my fast and dirty parts integration. So how I created this was just like I'm advising you to try out all of these things so you can gain experience with it and then come to the full understanding of how all of this works. What I discovered as I was coaching people is the visual squash works sometimes, sometimes not. It took a long time to do. Like if I'm in a coaching session with someone and we're working, we're getting things done, we're progressing, we're moving forward, everything's good, and then we hit a conflict or a parts problem. It's like, okay, we have to drop everything and then get going on the whole visual squash, and that would probably take up the rest of the session. And then we smash it together and we just hope it works out. And then the next session we check in and maybe there's still some resistance, and it's just like, okay, we got to do this all over again. I got tired of doing that. And I also didn't want to break out into the whole transformation of an ambiguous quality. And all the time it was really about a quality. Maybe it was on a bigger level, but it was like, it's a little too involved to really get into when all I'm really trying to do is keep this person moving forward into whatever transformation we're trying to create. It's like, I don't want to stop and go full on in this. So I started actually very organically just defaulting to this understanding of like, okay, well, we're trying to move forward with transforming an ambiguous quality or an unwanted quality into a positive quality. That's most of what my work when I'm coaching people is around. So we're moving forward and then we hit some resistance. There's a part resisting becoming whatever this quality is. And that's quite natural and normal because This is why they're not that quality already, or this is why they don't feel certain about being this quality already. Let's use success again. They don't feel successful, and we could look at them on paper and like they make tons of money, they have a great family, on and on and on, but they're experiencing imposter syndrome. They don't truly feel like a successful person. They're not happy. So we're going through that transformation, and then resistance comes up. There's some sort of resistance to being successful or thinking of themselves as being successful. And instead of dropping into the visual squash or going into a full-on transformation of a different quality, because I want to stay on track, I want to stay with this one, I would say, okay, we already know what the positive intention is of the transformation. That's the quality itself, success, right? We don't have to elicit that, it's already there. So we go to the resistance and we ask the resistance, what is your positive intention of resisting? Again, it'll come out stated in the negative. We get it turned into the positive. Well, what do you want instead of what you don't want? Get stated in the positive. We chunk up to a higher value, and I don't do a full values elicitation. All I need to do is get it to a value. So maybe it's the part says, I don't want to be greedy. Say, okay, what do you want instead? I want to give to charity. I want to give money to charity. That's not a value, that's an activity. So I need to get it chunked up to a value. Okay, you want to give money to charity. What would giving money to charity do for you? And I'm speaking directly to the part. And the part says, it would make me generous. Great. That's all I need. It just needs to be enough of a value. Generalization about an experience that's important to you, rather than an activity. Okay, good. We got the value, generosity. Then I turn to the successful part. Does generosity work for you? This part that wants to be successful, and usually does. I've never encountered anyone where it doesn't. And then I go back to the resistant part and ask it if it understands that the more successful you become, the more generous you can become. Part goes, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Now we're almost done. So we gain agreement with the part that actually it can get its value fulfilled better if it's combined with this other value, being this quality that you value. The last piece, which is super important, and I've had people break down into tears when I do this part, not always, but sometimes, because this is where the integration really happens. I ask the part if it would be willing to play a role, to have a job, and making sure that as you become more and more successful, that you become more and more generous, or whatever the values are that you're working with. You want to give that part a role, a position, a job. You want to include it in the transformation. You want to include it in whatever it is that you're doing. And I've had people break into tears right there. And it's like, that's what the part always wanted to begin with. It just wanted to be a part of the rest of the whole, instead of being pushed away because it was always judged as being resistance or laziness or procrastination. It was always being harshly judged. So it's you judging yourself, but it feels like you're separating yourself. And this is where we go wrong. But instead, we're bringing it back home. We're saying you are a valid part of me, because all parts of me are valid. And turning it on you, all parts of you are valid. That's why we don't want to resist our parts. And that's what most people do when they experience resistance. They just resist even more. They resist resistance. And that just makes it so much worse. Stop resisting resistance. Recognize that all parts of you are valid. And welcome it back home. And it's that welcoming it back home that makes people very emotional about it. And then that part becomes a part of the whole. And it's not just like we're welcoming it back, we're actually giving it a role. That's what it wants to. It wants to be useful. That's what a value is. A value, we're driven by our values. We want to be useful. We want to be of value to ourselves and to others. And so all parts of you want to be useful. The reason why a lot of times it resists or runs away or objects or goes deeper into unconsciousness is because it thinks you're going to take its value away from it. It believes you're going to take its job away from it. You're going to make it meaningless and pointless and not have a meaning, a purpose. We want purpose. That's what ultimately, when the whole idea behind aligning with all of our values is for purpose. And so all of your parts, no matter how resistant they are, all have purpose. You gave it a purpose. And I use this example a lot because it's actually what happened to me. I use a lot of my own examples. like maybe you're in a career where in order for you to level up, get promoted, whatever it is, you have to speak publicly. For me, it was YouTube. Before that, it was like Toastmasters. I knew there was something in me that I wanted to speak to large groups of people. I wanted to share my knowledge, share what I'm learning or have learned, share my experiences. But I was nervous. I thought I was going to be judged. I feared embarrassment, all of those things that we fear when we think about talking in public. And what I realized is that there was a very deep program inside of me. And I didn't have any major thing that happened when I was in grade school, but there were times in grade school when I had to get up and give a presentation where people laughed at me and I got embarrassed. And I told a part of me, don't ever let that happen to me again. So that part of me did its job. It took that pain and said, okay, we're never going to allow him to get into situations where this can happen again. That's resistance. It was disconnected. That pain was disconnected from the rest of me. And I sent this part on a mission to keep me from being embarrassed. Years and years later, when I'm trying to level up, this part is still doing its job and it's gone unconscious. So I don't know about this part. I don't know that it's doing a job for me, but it's still trying to carry out that job for me. So knowing what I know now, doing lots of NLP, I welcome that part back to talk to me, to find out what its positive intention is for me. And it tells me it doesn't want to be embarrassed anymore, or doesn't want to let me get into a situation where I might be embarrassed. And I say, okay, well, what do you want for me instead? And the part says, I just want you to be happy. Oh, emotion comes up over that. And they say, okay, all you really want from me is to be happy. And say, okay, well, we're older now. We're in a situation where it's not, we're not in high school, we're not in junior high or whatever. It's not, if people laugh at me, that's okay. I can still be happy. And then we give that part a role. Hey, I'm going to go after this thing called YouTube. I'm going to be talking in public. I'm going to give you a job. Would you take on this role? Making sure that no matter what, I stay happy. I do things that make me happy. And that part says, yes, let's do it. And then it integrates. And then we future pace that. We always future pace at the end of any process. So that's my fast and dirty way of using it. It works really, really fast. You don't have to do all the visual squash stuff. Like I keep saying, the most important part is to give that part a role. What's future pacing? Future pacing is when you start thinking of like real life examples into the future of how this is going to change. So for the example that I just gave you, I needed to go do these videos and I needed to let go of my embarrassment. And so I start to imagine it now. Okay, if I want to be happy and I'm no longer experiencing this resistance to doing this, what does that look like? What does that look like tomorrow? What does that look like in a week? What does that look like in a year from now? And I see myself doing these things. That's future pacing, is you create future examples of you bringing that change into your life. Okay, so you find the positive intention of both sides. It's the most important part. Gain agreement that both parts want the same thing by chunking up to high enough values. Always give the resistant part a job. Now, what's funny about this is my wife is now in training to be a self-concept coach. She's not sure if she's going to pursue it as a career, but she figured it was about time she learned how to do this stuff. And I had a situation. If you don't know, I practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm a purple belt. It's something I really enjoy doing. Not sure how much longer I can do it because I've been injured so many times. And I'm really cautious of injury now because I've been injured, and then I have to take a lot of time off to heal. And then my skills go down, and I get back out there, and I'm just like, it's not fun to get injured. And the more injured you get, especially the older you get, that starts to really create more and more pain in your body. And, I don't want to do that. So I was in Romania, and I found a place, because I kind of live part-time in Romania. My wife's Romanian. And I found a place to do jiu-jitsu. And I was like really excited about this because I'll go to Romania for like a month at a time, and then I don't have any place to do jiu-jitsu, so my skills kind of go away. And my endurance, that's the hardest part. My endurance goes down. So I found this place and I started going. And they're really intense. They're really intense. And I'm concerned that I'm going to get injured. And they do a lot of leg locks and ankle locks, and I'm not used to that. And that has a high propensity for injury because it's really easy to break an ankle. And so I'm like, okay, I want to learn this ankle lock game too, but I'm also very cautious. And so I tap easily. So that's how they get you into like a chokehold or an arm bar, and you tap to, so that they stop. And that's the way that you're able to protect yourself. So I'm going to this class and I'm enjoying it. And I've gone to several classes, and every time I come back, they know who I am. I'm that guy from California that comes in. And I think they also probably go harder on me because I'm from California, and they want to kind of show that, they're tough, and they are very tough. And the last time I went, this guy went for an ankle lock, and it was a really nasty one, and I could see it coming. And you can say tap or you can tap with your hand. I said tap twice, and he just went like that, and my ankle popped twice. And that was the only thing that slowed him down. Once he heard and felt my ankle pop twice, he realized he needed to stop, and he did. And then he blamed me for it. And then whenever the instructor found out what happened, he automatically blamed me, didn't ask any questions, just assumed it was my fault. And I was like, okay, wait a minute. I said tap, which they're supposed to stop. And he didn't stop. And not only that, even if I didn't say tap, or even if I didn't tap, not supposed to try to break joints and ankles and arms. You apply pressure gently until the person says tap or taps. So there was two things he did wrong. And this is how you get kicked out of a jiu-jitsu class: is you don't stop when someone says tap, or you intentionally try to go too hard and break something before just applying pressure. Like, you don't want to grab someone's arm and try to break it. You want to grab the arm, apply pressure, they tap, and then you let go. And then they blamed me. So that was three really bad things that happened there. Later, I wrote the instructor. I told him the whole story behind it. He gave me a call. And for the first half of the call, he still blamed me. And I was like, okay, you're out of your mind. I don't know where you got this idea from that it was my fault. Secondly, I don't know why you think this is okay to not stop when someone says tap. And then to try to, especially an ankle thing, you don't go full force on that. And then after he said, you know what, you're right. He shouldn't have done those things. I'll talk to him, and I really want you to come back to class. And I said, okay. And I thought I was going to go back to class. And the next time class was coming up, I felt this tremendous amount of resistance start coming up. I didn't want to go back to class, and I didn't fully understand it. And I knew I was recognizing what was happening. There was a lot of resistance. And so I said, honey, I don't actually call her that. I grabbed my wife and I said, hey, you're in training. Do you want to try a parts integration? She said, yes, she's always eager to do these things. And so she started eliciting both sides. Well, why do I do jujitsu? The two main values that came up was, I really enjoy it. It's so much fun. So joy, fun. And the other part of it, it's the best cardio workout you will ever get. So health, joy, fun. Those are my three main values that I get out of doing jujitsu. And then she went to the resistance. And as we uncovered what was going on with the resistance, we realized very quickly, and with her help, she was very good at this, realized that I was now perceiving going to this particular class, not all jiu-jitsu, because the class I go to in California, it's quite safe. I've never had these problems before. The going to this jiu-jitsu class was a direct violation of joy, a direct violation of fun, and a direct violation of my health. It's not fun if I have to worry about someone not stopping when I say tap or when I tap. There's no joy in it because I'm always worried that someone's going to injure me because they won't stop. And then I'm going to get blamed for it, even though I didn't do anything wrong. And then also breaking my ankle goes against my health. Breaking anything goes against my health. And it was so interesting how, as soon as I realized that, it was so obvious now. It wasn't that obvious before. It was so obvious now that I just made a decision that I could feel good about. I said, I'm not going back because it violates too many of my values. Whereas before I was struggling back and forth. Should I go? Should I not go? And I was just doing this. I was just grinding and burning up a lot of my energy. And once she helped me unpack all that and I could clearly see it, I was like, okay, the best choice here is to just not go, because I'm always going to be concerned that somebody's going to go for it and then I'm going to get blamed for it, and on and on and on. And then I was at peace because I was like, okay, well, now I can make this choice. Now I can make this decision and feel good about it. I understand it now. And so that was the benefit of doing that. All right, so I'm going to wrap this up, but I promised you to answer the biggest problem people have when dealing with resistance. What is the biggest problem? Is the biggest problem being able to make these processes work that I've given you? Not at all. These processes are not complicated. You can just follow step by step the instructions, and you could pull out, you could have them printed on a piece of paper and work through them just like that, and they will work almost like magic, probably like magic sometimes. Is that the biggest problem that people have with resistance? No, it's not. The biggest problem that people have with resistance is recognizing resistance. Most people don't know what's happening. Even with that jujitsu thing that I just explained, that example, it took me a little while to really recognize that it was resistance that I was experiencing. It wasn't obvious at first. So recognizing your resistance is the most difficult thing that people experience when it comes to resistance. For most people, their resistance is so unconscious that they don't know what's happening. They don't know what's stopping them, which means they will often blame other people, blame circumstances, or even judge or blame themselves. And none of those things are going to be very helpful, but it's like we don't know what's happening and we don't know what to do, so we have to like put it somewhere, right? The best thing that you can do is ask yourself, is what's holding me back right now resistance? And just get quiet with that and be honest with yourself. A lot of times that's what it is. And now you have all the tools to deal with that resistance. And the tools are easy to use. And some of them might take a little practice, like the ambiguous quality one, transforming that takes some practice, takes some understanding. But they're not difficult, and you can do this. It's the recognizing of the resistance that's the hardest part. Because it's, like I said, it's mostly unconscious. But if you get to know yourself well, you do a lot of this work on a regular basis, and you get really aligned with your unconscious, and you have a good relationship with your unconscious, you're constantly communicating with your unconscious, it becomes a lot easier to recognize resistance when it comes up. You cannot fix a problem that you're not aware of, that you're not conscious of. So that's why it's so difficult. When resistance comes up and you don't know that's what's happening, you can't solve that resistance problem. You can't integrate resistance if you don't know what's happening.